A silent international gate without warning. An airline leaves without a farewell. An airport once bustling now stands empty, as if the world has turned its back. America hasn't been attacked, there's no diplomatic crisis, yet it's gradually losing its place on the global aviation map. And no one is rushing to fly there anymore. What is really happening in the skies above the United States? And why are international airlines choosing to leave in silence? The sky collapses in silence. Not war, not terrorism, not a pandemic, and not even a global financial crisis. Yet, America's aviation industry is plunging into an unprecedented crisis. Quiet but intense, silent but profound, to the very roots of a system once seen as a symbol of national strength. An industry that once connected continents, brought America to the world, and the world to America, is now witnessing an organized exodus. Not through declarations, but through one-way, non-returnable tickets. $84 billion. That's not a random figure, but a bleeding wound of the global aviation sector in 2025, according to industry estimates. But the pain isn't just in the money lost. It lies in America's position within that deficit. Because America, once the most lucrative market for every international airline, is now becoming the epicenter of losses, flight schedule cuts, and half-empty aircraft. And the cruelest part is that this outlook isn't ending. Analysts forecast losses could reach $100 billion by 2026. This is no longer a temporary shock. It is a downward trajectory. But what chills boardrooms in Atlanta, Chicago, Frankfurt, or Doha isn't just the red lines on data sheets. It's the fact that passengers are vanishing. Those who once scrambled for cheap flights to New York are no longer coming. Families who once saved all year to touch the American dream are now vacationing in Lisbon, Seoul, or Buenos Aires. Business travelers who once viewed San Francisco as a hub for tech ecosystems now fly straight to Bangalore, Singapore, or Dubai. And airlines, the truest mirror of global demand, are responding with pure survival instinct. Cut, withdraw, and avoid the U.S. United Airlines, a cornerstone of America's aviation ecosystem, made a decision that could not have been easy, cutting 36,000 jobs, nearly half of its U.S. workforce. This isn't just downsizing. It's an admission that demand no longer justifies even the largest players. And when United moves, no one naively believes others will stand still. Because, in aviation, contagion doesn't spread weekly. It spreads hourly. One carrier's withdrawal triggers another's schedule shift. One route cancellation disrupts an entire supply chain. And when one international airline leaves an American city, a wave of partners, ground crews, hotels, taxi drivers, falls like dominoes. Unlike traditional crises, where government bailouts offer temporary relief, this decline stems from a deeper layer of the market. Trust and expectations have shifted. When international consumers no longer see America as an attractive destination, when operational costs spike due to tariffs and trade barriers, when airlines realize flying to the U.S. isn't profitable anymore, then no legislation can force them to fly at a loss. The irony is, these losses don't echo. They don't appear on prime-time news. There are no airport protests, no grand speeches in Congress. They manifest only in empty cabin seats, deserted international gates, duty-free shops with no shoppers, and declining revenue columns in quiet quarterly reports. This is a uniquely American collapse. No screams, no rubble, no sirens. Just the gradual absence of the world. An absence no one declares, but everyone feels. When airlines choose to place their new aircraft in Jakarta instead of Chicago, when international conferences move to Istanbul instead of Atlanta, when foreign students pick Toronto over Boston, America is no longer the default choice, and aviation, long seen as the circulatory system of globalization, is sending a clear signal. America is losing its most basic appeal: connectivity. In the past, the U.S. could lead the world through military power, technology, and a massive consumer market. But in the 21st century, where everything is measured by access and interaction, a country that loses its international flight routes is a country shrinking before the eyes of the world. And this time, it wasn't the world that chose to leave America. It was America, through its policies, its costs, and its choices, that created an environment where flying here is no longer worth it. Flights that never return. No alarms, no emergency press conferences, no farewell announcements. Yet one by one, international routes to the U.S. are disappearing, quietly, like the final breath of a once passionate relationship. And what's more frightening is that this disappearance is happening with order, with calculation, and without regret. Airline by airline, country by country, international aviation, corridor by corridor. Each is steadily pulling back its extended hand from America, not out of anger, but by profit margins and spreadsheets. Play Airlines, a young yet ambitious carrier from Iceland, once viewed the U.S. as a golden terminal in its expansion strategy. They didn't choose major urban airports like JFK or LAX. They came to Boston, Baltimore, Stewart, mid-sized gateways with explosive potential, places where it was still possible to believe that aviation could grow in a sustainable way. But by mid-2025, Play shut it all down. Quietly, no press release, no goodbye event, just no more tickets to book, no more arrivals, and an empty airport. Stewart Airport, once expected to become a new jewel in the suburbs of New York, lost its final route to Europe. The border control gates, built with state funding, now gather dust. Duty-free stores are deserted, and the global ambitions of a small town have quietly closed. At the northern border, Air Canada no longer hesitated. The airline withdrew from 5 key routes, and 8 U.S. regional airports were erased from its operations map. Cities once considered cross-border connectors for bilateral trade, Detroit, Indianapolis, Minneapolis, Nashville, and Tampa, are no longer a priority for international service. Not because of geography, but because the market psychology has changed. These cut routes are not temporary. They are not part of a hibernation plan for better days. These routes have been erased from booking systems, removed from display boards, and deleted from global databases. When an airport loses an international route, it doesn't just lose a transport link, it loses its place on the world map. This withdrawal is no longer an exception. It's a strategy. Lufthansa didn't even try to hide the reason. They publicly admitted, demand for U.S. routes has peaked. The statement may sound simple, but it carries the weight of a final verdict. America is no longer a gold mine, no longer a central hub, no longer a place worth pumping resources into. What's notable is that airlines are pulling out without drama. No accusations, no complaints. They just quietly leave, because they understand that the America of 2025 is no longer easy to navigate, predictable, or easily integrated. They are not sulking, they're simply redirecting, like any economic current finding the path of least resistance. That's why it's not just the big airports being affected. Mid-sized and smaller airports, once potential bridges between America and the world, are suffering the deepest losses. According to OAG data, in just the first 10 months of 2025, more than 320,000 seats on flights between the U.S. and Canada have been eliminated. This is no seasonal adjustment. It's a structural retreat. In cities like Buffalo or Tampa, the loss of an international route is not merely an inconvenience for travelers. It's the collapse of an entire value chain. From logistics firms, ground services, rental car companies, to hotels, restaurants, diners, and local tourism boards. Hundreds of millions of dollars were invested in expanding airport infrastructure, enlarging custom zones, and marketing these destinations, now all sitting still in quiet futility. With international erased from their identity, these airports become mere domestic terminals, lacking the appeal for investors, international tourists, and global corporations, who are increasingly placing their headquarters elsewhere. Without flight routes, conferences don't come, companies don't expand, universities can't attract international students. A city may be beautiful, modern, and full of potential, but if it's no longer on the world's flight map, it will gradually become invisible. When an airline leaves America, it doesn't just take a plane. It takes with it a flow of people, a flow of money, and a flow of connectivity. That's what's happening now. Not because America is no longer important, but because America is no longer easy to reach. And in a world where connectivity is the foundation of power, the disappearance of international flights is a warning that needs no words. The expensive dream on America's runway. The American dream still exists, vivid in movies, vibrant in speeches, and glittering in the imagination of those who have never set foot there. But that dream now comes with too high a price. Not because it has changed, but because the road leading to it is being fenced off by tariffs, costs, and uncertainty. At a deeper level of the international aviation retreat from the U.S., it's not national pride or political ideology pushing airlines away. Nor is it isolationism or a rigid America First doctrine. It's ledgers, it's numbers, it's profit and loss statements, and above all, it's the cost of surviving in American skies, a cost that has risen to unreasonable levels. Since the beginning of 2025, a series of new tax policies have been enacted under the banner of protecting national interests. 25% on imports from Canada and Mexico, 20% from China, and 10% on most other economies. Taxes once thought to only affect steel, aluminum, or cars are now seeping into the aviation system like corroding acid. Planes don't just need fuel and crew. They require navigation systems, landing gear, spare parts, wiring, control panels, auxiliary engines, and hundreds of technical components, most of which are not produced domestically, or, if they are, not in quantities sufficient for the entire network. For international carriers, maintaining regular operations in the U.S. now means paying higher tariffs for every bolt, every piece of fuselage, every drop of lubricant. A plane stationed at San Francisco is now more expensive than the same one parked in Singapore. Costs rise, but revenue doesn't keep up, because on the other side of the equation, the number of international travelers coming to the U.S. is sharply declining. Partly due to rising ticket prices, and partly because of growing entry barriers, lengthy visa processing, strict financial requirements, and dense security procedures. Meanwhile, other destinations, from Europe to Southeast Asia, are loosening visa rules, encouraging tourism and investment with more flexible, low-cost, and accessible policies. Not everyone can, or wants to, wait 6 weeks to get a visa to the U.S. when it only takes 6 minutes to get approved for Thailand, France, or the UAE. Furthermore, a strong U.S. dollar in 2025 has turned every expenditure in America into a burden for foreign tourists. When a night at a hotel in New York costs twice as much as in Berlin or Seoul, when a modest lunch in San Francisco is as expensive as a fine dinner in Lisbon, airlines don't need to run customer surveys to understand that America is becoming too costly to attract. And as international passenger numbers drop, routes become unprofitable, and every strategy to maintain them becomes merely a delay of the inevitable. So airlines are no longer waiting. Lufthansa cuts frequency to the U.S., reallocating aircraft to India and Southeast Asia. Air France scales back transatlantic routes, boosting links with Africa. Qatar Airways and Emirates maintain some U.S. routes, but they're not adding, not expanding, not investing further. Turkish Airlines, once viewing the U.S. as a strategic market, now pours resources into Jakarta, Mumbai, and Nairobi. Everyone understands. Continuing to prioritize the U.S. no longer ensures profitability. And in aviation, every empty seat is a specific loss. Every inefficient flight hour is a wasteful decision. It's deeply ironic. America, once a symbol of free trade, once leading the world through cross-border agreements, is now a place international businesses hesitate to enter. Not because they hate the U.S., but because it's no longer easy to deal with, no longer predictable, and above all, no longer survivable. The simple but bitter truth is this. The 2025 tariff regime has turned the U.S. market into a harsh climate for commerce. No one flies into weather that's too cold for business, and even fewer fly when the skies are riddled with cost traps. International airlines aren't abandoning America for a political statement. They're leaving because of a profit chart. And that chart, not any speech, is the real map of power in the modern global economy. Cities that lost their wings. Each international flight route is more than just a transportation line. It's a lifeline. It connects a city to the world, connects people to opportunity, links an airport to thousands of jobs, and ties a small cafe to waves of travelers carrying luggage and hope. When a flight disappears, what's lost isn't just a ticket. It's an entire economic ecosystem being unplugged. And now, across America, that is exactly what's happening. From Buffalo to Tampa, from Seattle to Detroit, cities are losing their wings, one by one. We used to think aviation downturns were the business of airlines, Wall Street, and investors sitting behind projection screens in boardrooms. But when those numbers start hitting the ground, into the diner near the airport, into the empty cab line, into a hotel room lit only by a neon lamp, but no guests, then we understand. This is a crisis of cities, of communities. In Buffalo, which once banked on a strong relationship with Canada to brand itself as a gateway city, streets once filled with Quebec and Ontario visitors now stand empty. Hotel bookings sharply dropped starting Q1 of 2025. Restaurants that once displayed bilingual menus have now dropped French altogether. Convenience stores along the airport corridor have lost 50% of their revenue from Canadian business travelers, a revenue stream that once kept the area's economic heartbeat alive. Taxi drivers say they wait twice as long for half the earnings. Tampa, once known as the sunny gateway for European travelers escaping winter, is struggling to maintain its hub status. International gates at Tampa International Airport are now locked in silence, devoid of the sound of rolling luggage, passports being flipped, or foreign languages being spoken. For months, international boarding gates have sat unused. Local authorities admit they don't know when, or if, passenger volumes will ever return to pre-pandemic levels, because while the pandemic has passed, the chill from policy and cost remains. Seattle, with its dream of becoming a global tech hub and a student transit center, is stalling as Asian carriers cut back frequency. International students from China, South Korea, and Southeast Asia, once a significant revenue stream for universities and the local housing market, are declining sharply. When airlines stop offering direct flights to the U.S., students simply choose other schools, where air travel is easier, visas quicker, and costs lower. Detroit, a city that has long struggled with post-industrial recovery, once relied on its geographic proximity to Canada to rebuild international ties. But when Air Canada and other Great Lakes carriers simultaneously withdrew routes, all investments in tourism, from trade shows to ticket discounts, turned into sunk costs. Every brochure printed for international visitors became scrap paper in storage. All these cities share one thing in common. They invested in airport infrastructure, believing flight routes wouldn't disappear. They expanded terminals, upgraded border systems, launched global marketing campaigns with multi-million-dollar budgets. But now, with planes no longer landing, those investments have become cold legacies. And more painful still is the loss of status. A city can have rich culture, promising businesses, and top-tier universities. But if it no longer has international roots, it's eliminated from the mental map of investors, event organizers, students, and even vacationing families. International board meetings aren't held in cities requiring 2 layovers. Conferences don't pick places where tickets cost twice as much as Bangkok. Foreign students don't apply to universities where visas take 3 months and involve detours. Multinational companies don't place offices in places that are disconnected. And so, the impact of international airlines pulling out goes beyond commerce. It is a full-scale withdrawal from culture, education, vision, and influence. It may seem that America is only losing airline seats, but in reality, the U.S. is losing its role as a destination. And once a city is no longer a place people go to, it eventually stops being a place people think about. Losing a flight isn't just losing a route, it's slowly losing a place in the world's memory. When the global center takes flight. In the world of aviation, every shift begins with something seemingly simple: an airline choosing a new destination. But behind each new route lies an economic map in motion, a global pulse changing direction. And now, as international carriers choose to add flights to Jakarta, Nairobi, Mumbai, or Sao Paulo instead of San Francisco, Chicago, or Dallas, one thing is clearer than ever. The U.S. is no longer the center the world wants to revolve around. This shift is no accident. It's the result of a series of strategic meetings, of meticulous analyses of revenue per flown kilometer, seat occupancy rates, average passenger spending, and policy risks. When all that data is fed into the system, what airlines realize is this: the future no longer lies in America, but in Asia, Africa, and the rising BRICS economies. Turkish Airlines, once proud to call itself the bridge between East and West, has quietly pulled back investment from North America to launch a series of new routes connecting Istanbul with Mumbai, Jakarta, Luanda, and Sao Paulo. These destinations aren't just population hubs, they are emerging centers of trade and transport. They're not just flying passengers, they're carrying long-term expectations of a new order, one where growth comes from across the Atlantic. China Southern and China Eastern, 2 aviation giants from China, no longer crave conquering America as they once did. Instead of expanding routes to Los Angeles, Chicago, or Seattle, they are cutting schedules, redirecting efforts to connect China with Bangkok, Kuala Lumpur, Nairobi, and Lima. These new routes are not experiments, they are declarations. China no longer sees the U.S. as the anchor of its international aviation network. They are shifting their axis south and east. At the same time, Emirates and Qatar Airways, the jewelers of Middle Eastern aviation, are also redirecting their strategies. Rather than expanding routes to Boston, Houston, or Denver, they are increasing frequency to Singapore, Dar es Salaam, Ho Chi Minh City, and Addis Ababa. U.S. airports aren't being shunned, but they are no longer on the investment priority list. It's a form of polite rejection, but one with serious consequences. By investing in these new routes, these airlines aren't just chasing profits, they are actively helping redraw the map of global mobility. They bring aircraft, personnel, offices, advertising, and trade alliances to regions with faster growth, fewer barriers, and greater opportunity. And every time they choose Jakarta over New York, they're casting a vote for a future where the U.S. is no longer the default destination. The world of 2025 no longer revolves around one pole. New centers of power don't sit in Manhattan skyscrapers. They lie along flight paths to fast-changing cities, from Bangalore to Cape Town, São Paulo to Ho Chi Minh City. And airlines, as the ones who draw the routes, are accurately reflecting that. Meanwhile, America remains static, or even retreats, not just due to taxes, visas, or high costs, but because the domestic U.S. market is saturated and the international one is full of obstacles. While emerging nations see a surge in the middle class, growing demand for travel, investment, and international connection, the U.S. is becoming harder to access, less appealing, and no longer a priority. The most important issue isn't how many routes America is losing, but how many new routes are being created elsewhere. For every aircraft pulled from the U.S., another is being deployed to a developing destination. And when airlines bet on Lagos, Manila, or Casablanca, they're not just making money. They're planting seeds for a shift in soft power, culture, and influence. A single route is a choice. A network of routes is a map of influence. And if those maps no longer place America at the center, then perhaps it's time for the U.S. to understand. It is no longer the place the world automatically chooses. It must earn back that place through policy, connection, and by becoming a destination worth reaching once again. The silent disappearance of a superpower. No terrorism, no war, no natural disaster, and no flight ban issued by any international organization. Yet somehow, America is gradually being erased from the global aviation map. Not with shouting, but with absences. Departure boards no longer show its cities. Gates no longer list outgoing flights. And international lounges echo only with the sound of ceiling fans. This withdrawal is no longer a forecast. It is happening. Day by day, week by week, quarter by quarter, international airlines are cutting more routes, reducing staff, and turning down expansion opportunities in the U.S. But what worries strategic planners most isn't the current numbers. It's the trajectory being formed. A trajectory that, if not corrected in time, will pull America off the axis of global connectivity. Airlines are not just trimming a few flights. They're rewriting entire operational strategies. Emirates maintains its U.S. flight schedule but has added no new routes in 2 years, while increasing 50 new weekly flights to Asia and Africa. Turkish Airlines, Qatar Airways, Air India, Singapore Airlines are all shifting investments toward sustainable growth markets, which no longer include the U.S. These airlines don't say they've abandoned America because they don't need to. They simply stop assigning new aircraft there. They close regional offices. They end promotional campaigns. They walk away from partnership talks at U.S. airports. Absence is the loudest statement. But America isn't just losing ground in aviation statistics. It is losing a kind of soft power, the influence that comes from being chosen as a destination. When airlines no longer include the U.S. in strategic investment plans, the ecosystems around them vanish as well. International conferences shift to Bangkok or Dubai. Foreign students choose Toronto, Sydney, or Berlin. Global companies set up headquarters in Singapore or Istanbul instead of Dallas or Chicago. At America's top universities, international student applications dropped 15% in 2025, according to the Association of International Educators. Not because academic quality declined, but simply because the flight routes were cut. With no direct flights, no fast visas, and no logistical support, students, especially from developing countries, choose other places. The cost of access has replaced academic appeal. International organizations, from the United Nations to global business alliances, are gradually relocating events away from the U.S. due to rising travel costs, logistical complications, and policy instability. They don't need to cancel partnerships with America. They just pick easier alternatives. And every time they do, another international bond quietly erodes. Worse still, while airlines retreat in an orderly fashion, many U.S. airports and cities receive no advance warning, no farewell ceremony, no emergency meeting. Just one day, the international gate lights up, but no plane arrives. At Stewart Airport, New York, the last flight to Europe disappeared in silence, dragging with it hundreds of indirect jobs, from security and cleaning staff to travel coordinators. No press conference. No one stood up to explain. Only absence remained. And when a city loses its international route, it doesn't just lose a service. It loses part of its identity. A city no longer connected to the world will slowly be forgotten by the world. Investors look elsewhere. Tourists stop coming. Startups relocate to places where partners can be flown in more easily. What's lost is not just economics, but status, memory, and trust. Never before in modern history has America, a country once the default destination for the world, had to ask, are we still a place worth coming to? When airlines, students, business people, conferences, and even tourists all choose alternate routes, or go somewhere else entirely, then this is no longer a logistical issue. It is a matter of perception. And the saddest part? That perception doesn't come from a major shock. It arrives bit by bit, flight by flight, departure board by departure board, with America's name slowly disappearing. No noise, no drama, just a superpower fading into silence. The skyway home is narrowing. When a country disappears from the global aviation map, what remains is not just empty air, but a void in connection, influence, and stature. And now, America is facing the greatest question of the post-globalization era. Is there still a way back, when the sky no longer welcomes? For decades, the United States didn't need to invite the world. The world came on its own. Tickets to New York were once symbols of dreams. Conferences in Boston were magnets for intellect. Trade shows in Las Vegas were the grandest stages of commerce. But in 2025, the reality has shifted. No one has declared a retreat from America, but people are slowly turning their backs by simply not flying here anymore. And in that context, the question is no longer what have we lost, but how do we get it back? Answering that question isn't easy, because the current decline is no longer a short-term shock caused by a pandemic or economic crisis. This is a long-term restructuring, where airlines, investors, international students, tourists, and global corporations are all redefining the concept of the world center. And America, sadly, is falling outside of those new definitions. To turn the tide, the United States can no longer act as the default destination. It needs more than investment pitches or marketing slogans. America must return to the very foundations that once drew the world in: openness, accessibility, and competitive advantage. The first thing to clarify is this: costs are killing appeal. Airlines aren't rejecting America out of dislike. They're walking away because it's no longer financially viable to operate here. Maintaining a 25% import tax on parts from Canada, 20% from China, and 10% from the rest of the world doesn't just increase operational costs, it sends a cold message. America no longer wants anyone else to fly in. To change that, Washington must act, not with temporary bailout packages for airports, but with strategic dialogue with global partners. New air tax treaties, easier visa policies, and infrastructure support mechanisms for international carriers need to be restarted, not to regain glory, but to re-enter the game. Secondly, the U.S. needs to make peace with predictability. Over the years, its legal environment, from taxation to border control, has become erratic, making it hard for airlines to plan long-term. No carrier can invest hundreds of millions in a flight route without knowing if visas will still be issued the following week. Third, and perhaps most importantly, America needs to reinvest in its soft infrastructure, its ability to host. An international conference choosing Singapore over San Francisco isn't just about flight routes, it's about feeling welcome. Cultural events, academic exchanges, multilateral dialogues. Once America's strengths are now being replaced by more agile, less restrictive nations. But not all is lost. The sky, like geopolitics, is always in motion. And if America is bold enough, self-reflective enough, it still has a chance to reclaim its place. Opportunity lies in the world's exhaustion with instability. As emerging markets face infrastructure bottlenecks, operational shortfalls, or political unrest, America, if it can reassert its stability and reliability, could again become a trustworthy destination. But that won't happen by waiting. It won't happen by assuming other countries will come back when they need to. It won't happen if planes continue turning away. Redefining America's role in global aviation isn't just a logistics challenge, it's a strategic one. Because in an era where connection is power, a nation losing those connections won't just lose passengers, it will lose influence. And once the world gets used to not needing America, the road back will no longer be a runway. It will be a steep incline. A soft landing is still possible, but the window of opportunity is closing. Before airport screens around the world go dark on United States, America must decide, will it board the last flight or become the terminal left behind?